Good evening, dear listeners, and a very warm welcome to you all. Wherever you are tuning in from tonight, maybe cozied up in bed, listening from your favorite quiet corner at home, or perhaps relaxing somewhere peaceful, with the world fading away outside, I'm so glad you've joined me here. Take a slow, deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. Maybe pull the covers up a bit higher and feel the day gently slip away. London fog lay thick upon the city that autumn evening. At 221B Baker Street, Holmes sat idle, craving challenge. Then came the telegram. Victim found dead at Euston Station, upon the Liverpool Express, stabbed in his locked compartment. Scotland Yard saw robbery gone wrong. But Holmes saw a link. The victim's pocket watch stopped at precisely 3:17, yet the train had departed at 3 o'clock. One link in a chain that would bind a killer. The game is afoot. Chapter 1. The First Link. I set down these events as they occurred in the autumn of 1892, when the chill of approaching winter already gripped the streets of London. My friend Sherlock Holmes had been in one of his restless moods for days, pacing before the coal fire at 221B Baker Street, his Stradivarius violin lying neglected amid scattered chemical apparatus and papers. The fog outside pressed thick against the window panes like a gray shroud, carrying the sharp, acrid smell of coal smoke from 100 chimneys, blended with the ever-present damp rot of Thames mud that clung to the city in this season. Mrs. Hudson climbed the 17 worn steps with a telegram clutched in her hand, her footsteps soft on the threadbare carpet runner. "This arrived for you just now, Mr. Holmes," she said, offering it with her usual brisk courtesy, her apron still dusted with flour from downstairs. Holmes snatched it eagerly, his long fingers tearing the envelope, as his eyes took on that peculiar hungry gleam which always signaled the arrival of a worthy puzzle. "Read it aloud, Watson," he instructed, already reaching into the Persian slipper for a pinch of shag tobacco. I unfolded the thin paper, feeling its slightly rough texture still warm from Mrs. Hudson's grasp. The message came from Inspector Lestrade. "Murder aboard Liverpool Express. Victim Sir Reginald Thorne, prominent industrialist, stabbed in locked first-class compartment. Body discovered upon arrival at Euston this evening. Robbery appears motive. Your immediate assistance requested." "Capital!" Holmes cried, lighting his pipe with quick, precise movements. The rich, pungent aroma of tobacco filled the room, mingling with the warm crackle of the coal fire and driving back the bitter chill that seeped through the cracks. "The game is afoot, Watson. We must reach Euston without delay." We descended to the street where the fog lay so dense that gas lamps appeared as hazy halos. A hansom cab clattered up at our hail, its iron-shod wheels grinding over cold, wet cobblestones, the horse snorting plumes of steam into the night air. The journey passed in a symphony of sounds, the rhythmic clip-clop of hooves, the distant toll of Big Ben marking the hour, the low moan of foghorns drifting up from the river. Euston Station buzzed with subdued activity despite the late hour. Gas lights flickered through the swirling mist, casting long, wavering shadows across the platforms. The air carried the heavy mixture of locomotive steam, hot oil, wet iron, and the faint, metallic tang of rain. Inspector Lestrade awaited us near the cordoned Liverpool Express, his lantern swinging as he approached. "Glad you've come, gentlemen," he said, voice rough amid the hissing escape of steam from the engine. Sir Reginald Thorne, wealthy manufacturer, was found stabbed through the heart in his private compartment. Door locked from the inside, window bolted shut. No sign of forced entry. Wallet gone, so robbery is the yard's theory. He conducted us into the first-class carriage. The compartment felt close and stale, the air thick with the sharp scent of carbolic from the medical examiner's kit, and a faint underlying coppery note of blood. The body still slumped in the leather seat, smooth and worn from years of travel, his overcoat open, a single dark stain spreading across his waistcoat. Holmes knelt at once, producing his magnifying glass. His steepled fingers rested under his chin as he studied the corpse. "Observe this, Watson," he said, indicating the gold pocket watch dangling from a chain. Its hands stood frozen at precisely 3:17. The train left Liverpool at noon and reached Euston shortly after 6. Yet the watch ceased hours earlier. Accepted a flask of bitter coffee from Lestrade, its heat welcome against the compartment's chill. The sound of rain pattered steadily on the station roof overhead. Holmes continued his examination, drawing attention to the boots. The mud upon his boots, reddish clay mixed with fine coal dust. The link. Such soil occurs only in the immediate vicinity of Liverpool's dockside foundries, where ironworks border clay pits used for brick-making. The forge. I recall a parallel in the Red-Headed League affair, where boot marks bearing tunnel earth expose the criminal's underground activity beneath Jabez Wilson's pawnshop. The ground remembers every step, Watson. No amount of alibi can erase what clings to leather. In that case, the clay on the trousers and knees forged an unbreakable chain, linking the tunnelers to the bank vault they sought to rob. The chain. Here, therefore, Sir Reginald did not board at Liverpool station as claimed, but joined the train later, near those very docks. The timeline of the entire journey is thus altered. The link forges strong, Watson. Did you see it form? The bind. Lestrade rubbed his chin, the rough tweed of his sleeve brushing the compartment wall. The conductor insists the door remained locked throughout. No one reported seeing Thorne leave his seat. Holmes rose and paced the narrow space, eyes gleaming. Then consider this second link, the faint, fresh scratch upon the lock plate. Deliberate, made from within, perhaps by a thin tool slipped under the door. He inhaled deeply, the lingering scent of gunpowder from his earlier chemical experiments still on his hands. A discarded newspaper lay sodden on the floor, its damp pages pulpy and cold under my fingers, ink smearing like fresh blood. "And the suspects?" I asked, hearing the rain increase its drumming. "6 persons of interest," Lestrade replied. "Lady Thorne in the next compartment. Business partner Elias Blackwood, claiming 2nd class. Governess Clara Vance, traveling alone. Dr. Harlan Croft, who spoke with the victim briefly. Rival Victor Slade. And Conductor Jenkins, who forced the door." Holmes lifted a cigar stub from the ashtray, sniffing its sharp foreign tobacco odor. "Turkish, not Thorne's preferred Virginia." A visitor entered then. The compartment's chill made me shiver, in stark contrast to the hot tea I now sipped from my own flask. "The chain begins here," Holmes murmured, "with watch, mud, scratch, links waiting to be connected." I could only marvel, as always, at how his mind wove order from chaos, while the fog outside grew thicker, mirroring the deepening mystery. That evening, returned to Baker Street, we sat by the roaring fire. Its warmth banished the night's bitter cold as Holmes drew thoughtfully on his pipe, the smooth clay warm in his palm. "Think of the Boscombe Valley case, Watson," he said. A dying cry seemed to accuse a son, yet Australian soil on the weapon traced the true killer's history. Mud on boots matched Ballarat clay, forging the chain that bound the blackmailer and freed the innocent. So here the ground speaks again of hidden movements. I tasted the sweet warmth of brandy he poured, feeling the fire's heat on my face. Footsteps sounded on the stairs, Mrs. Hudson with supper. The first link forged. The chain begins. The link was there in the mud. Did you spot it before Holmes? Watson overlooked the stopped watch. Did you catch its meaning? What chain would you start building from the lock scratch? The dock mud connection seems faint. Can you see it clearly? Holmes already holds 3 links. How many did you notice? Before he mentions the cigar, what does this evidence begin to chain together? Chapter 2. Forging Connections. Looking back, I should have perceived the links beginning to join, even as we left the grim compartment at Euston. But Holmes's mind raced ahead while mine still grappled with the first revelations. The following morning, the fog lingered stubbornly over Baker Street, its damp chill seeping through every crack and carrying the ever-present odor of coal smoke from the street braziers below. We breakfasted by the fire, hot tea steaming in thick china cups, toast crisp and buttered, the crackling coals a comforting counterpoint to the autumn cold outside. Holmes stood before the mantel, violin tucked under his chin, plucking a few idle notes that sounded thin and restless in the warm room. The chain will not grow of its own accord. Watson, he said, we must visit the persons of interest and test each observation against their stories. Mrs. Hudson cleared the breakfast things with soft footsteps, leaving behind the faint scent of fresh scones that mingled pleasantly with Holmes's tobacco. Our first call was to Lady Thorne's residence in Mayfair. The hansom cab rattled briskly over the cobblestones, wheels hissing through shallow puddles, the horse's breath visible in white clouds. Inside the drawing-room, the air smelled of lavender sachets and beeswax polish. The leather armchairs felt smooth and cool under our hands. Lady Thorne received us in deep mourning, a black lace handkerchief pressed to her lips. Reginald was adamant about traveling alone, she said in a low voice. Business in Liverpool, something urgent with the foundries. I remained here. Her fingers twisted the silk handkerchief, its texture fine and cool. Holmes regarded the empty jewel case on a side table. This ruby necklace, family heirloom? She nodded. It vanished from the house 2 days before he left. I assumed he took it for safekeeping. The distant chime of Big Ben rolled through the fogged windows, marking noon. From Mayfair we crossed to the city, the cab splashing along the embankment where the Thames mud's sour stench rose with the tide. Mr. Elias Blackwood's offices occupied the upper floor of a soot-blackened building. The air inside carried the mingled smells of ink, sealing wax, and strong pipe tobacco. Blackwood, broad-shouldered and heavily mustached, greeted us with guarded civility. I traveled second class, he declared, seating himself behind a broad desk. Thorne and I had quarreled over contracts. Yes, but murder. Absurd. Holmes's gaze fell upon the man's boots. Yet you carry the same reddish clay and coal dust I observed on Sir Reginald. Explain. Blackwood shifted, the rough tweed of his coat rustling. I was at the docks the day before departure. Routine inspection of shipments. Nothing more. Rain began tapping insistently against the window panes, cold droplets streaking the glass. Our next visit took us to Kensington and the modest lodgings of Miss Clara Vance. The narrow staircase smelled faintly of carbolic soap. Her small sitting room was tidy but humble. the damp newspaper on a side table still sodden from the morning's delivery. She offered us tea, bitter and hot in thin cups, and spoke in a soft, trembling voice. "I was returning from a post as governess in Liverpool," she said. "I noticed nothing unusual. The conductor can confirm I remained in my compartment." Her hands shook slightly as she set down her cup. The porcelain clinked against the saucer. Holmes studied a blue wool shawl draped over the chair back. "This fabric, distinctive weave." She nodded quickly. "Yes, but I lent it briefly to Lady Thorne when she felt a chill at the station." We pressed on to Harley Street in the surgery of Dr. Harlan Croft. The waiting room carried the sharp sting of carbolic and a faint undertone of gunpowder. Croft, it transpired, practiced target shooting as recreation. He adjusted his spectacles and spoke with calm precision. "I saw Sir Reginald only once at Crewe, when he complained of indigestion. I gave him a draught and returned to my seat." Holmes eyed the surgical case on the desk. "Your knife, keen blade." Croft smiled thinly. "Every physician carries one. My patients can vouch for my whereabouts." Evening was falling as we reached Mr. Victor Slade's club in Pall Mall. The heavy doors shut out the fog. Inside, the air was rich with fine cigar smoke and old brandy. Leather-bound volumes lined the walls, their spines smooth under my fingertips. Slade, lean and sardonic, lounged in a deep armchair. "Thorne's death? A convenience for business, I confess," he said with a thin smile. "But I never boarded that train. I was here in London. Ask the steward." Holmes produced a telegram slip. "Yet you sent an urgent wire to Liverpool the previous day." Slade's composure flickered for an instant. "Mere coincidence. Commercial matters." Returned to Baker Street, we sat once more by the fire. The coals snapped and spat. The room felt warm and safe after the day's damp journeys. Holmes drew thoughtfully on his pipe, the smooth clay warm against his lips. "Observe how the links multiply, Watson," he said. "Lady Thorne's missing necklace suggests motive beyond simple robbery. Blackwood's boots tie him to the docks, where Sir Reginald must have boarded secretly. Miss Vance's shawl places wool in the compartment. Croft's knife matches the wound's character. Slade's telegram hints at prior knowledge. And the conductor, Jenkins, handled coal. The dust is everywhere." I tasted the sweet edge of brandy he poured into my glass, its warmth spreading through me as the rain drummed against the panes. "The chain is taking form," Holmes murmured, eyes gleaming in the firelight. "Each interview forges another connection. Links forging. The chain takes shape." Chapter 3. The chain grows you, dear reader, may already be tracing the faint outline of the chain that was beginning to form in my own mind. Yet at the time, I confess, I still stumbled in the dark while Holmes moved with unerring certainty. The fog refused to lift on the third day. It hung over London like a pall, thickening the air with coal smoke and the sour dampness of the river. We returned to Euston Station in the late morning, the platform slick underfoot, cold cobblestones gleaming wetly beneath the gaslights that burned even at midday. Inspector Lestrade met us beside the stationary Liverpool Express, now shunted to a siding. The locomotive had cooled. Only wisps of steam escaped now and then with faint hisses. The compartment door stood ajar, the interior still carrying that lingering metallic bite of blood beneath the sharper smell of carbolic left by the police surgeon. Holmes stepped inside without hesitation, his boots scraping on the metal threshold. He knelt at once beside the seat where Sir Reginald had died, running his magnifying glass over the floorboards. Their worn wood felt rough under my fingertips when I crouched beside him. "Here, Watson," he said quietly. "A single thread, blue wool, caught on a splinter near the door." I peered closer. The thread was fine but unmistakable, its color vivid against the dark varnish. Holmes plucked it carefully with tweezers and held it to the light filtering through the grimy window. Distinctive weave, imported Scottish wool, the sort used for durable traveling garments. Lestrade leaned in the doorway, arms folded, the rough tweed of his overcoat brushing the frame. The governess, Miss Vance, wore a blue shawl when we interviewed her, but she insists she never left her own compartment. Holmes did not reply at once. Instead, he moved to the small stove in the corner where faint warmth still lingered from the last stoking. He scraped a sample of residue from the iron rim and sniffed it. Gunpowder, traces, fresh, odd in a railway carriage. The compartment felt close despite the draft. I tasted the bitter edge of the coffee I had brought in a flask, its heat a small comfort against the chill. He turned next to the lock. The scratch we had noticed before caught the gaslight at a new angle. "And the windowsill," he continued. "A smudge of oil, machine oil, not from any passenger's hand." Outside, rain began again, a drumming steadily on the carriage roof, its cold seeping through every crack. Holmes straightened, steepled his fingers beneath his chin, and spoke in that calm, measured tone that always heralded a revelation. The blue wool thread upon the floor, distinctive Scottish weave. The link. Such material is standard for governess traveling cloaks and shawls, chosen for warmth and resistance to wear. The forge. I recall the Musgrave ritual case with perfect clarity. A butler's cuff left a single dark thread on a nail in the cellar steps, betraying his secret descent to retrieve the ancient crown. Brunton had overlooked how stubbornly fabric clings to rough surfaces. That one fiber, traced to a tailor's ledger in Edinburgh, forged the chain that linked him to the hidden treasure and his own eventual fate beneath the lake. The ground, the wood, the cloth, they all remember, Watson. The chain. Therefore, Miss Vance was in this compartment at some point after departure, despite her denial. The link is forged. Did you see it take shape, Watson? The bind. I felt the cold of the compartment deepen into my bones. But motive, I asked. Why would a governess? Holmes had already moved to the seat cushion. With a quick pressure, he discovered a loose panel beneath it. Inside lay a crumpled telegram form, its paper still faintly scented with ink. He read aloud. Deal cancelled. Slade demands double or threatens exposure. B. Lestrade whistled softly. Blackwood. Precisely, Holmes said. And see here, the watch crystal bears internal condensation. It did not merely run down. It was immersed briefly in water, then replaced. Someone stopped it deliberately at 3:17 to falsify the time of death. The rain increased, its rhythm blending with the distant clatter of shunting engines and the low moan of a foghorn from the river. Holmes paced the narrow aisle, eyes gleaming with that peculiar light. The thread places Vance here. The telegram ties Blackwood to prior knowledge. The gunpowder on the stove links to Croft's sporting habits. He admitted target practice. The oil smudge suggests mechanical tampering, perhaps the conductor's domain. And the watch manipulation points to someone who wished to obscure when the crime actually occurred. I shivered, drawing my coat closer. The leather seat felt cold and sticky beneath me. Then the robbery was staged? Almost certainly, Holmes replied. the missing wallet and necklace, convenient losses to mask the true motive. We left the carriage as the rain turned to a steady downpour, the cobblestones shining black under our boots. Back at Baker Street that evening, the fire roared high, its warmth welcome after the day's damp. Holmes sat in his armchair, pipe in hand, the smooth clay warm against his lips. "Think of a study in scarlet, Watson," he said reflectively. There Jefferson Hope staged an elaborate ruse with 2 pills to avenge his betrothed. Yet the dust on the floorboards, the cab tracks, the word Rach, all small links that chained past tragedy in Utah to a London sitting room. Time and place were manipulated then as now. Observation defeated deception. I sipped sweet brandy, feeling its heat spread through me while the rain lashed the windows. The chain was growing stronger with every hour. The chain grows stronger. Logic binds. Chapter 4. Testing the links. I have often reflected that it is in the testing of each link that the true strength, or frailty, of the chain becomes apparent. Holmes never accepted a deduction until he had hammered it against reality. And so it was on the 4th day that we set out to break or confirm the emerging connections. The fog had thinned at last, though a fine drizzle persisted, leaving the streets slick and the air heavy with the smell of wet coal smoke and horse manure. Gas lamps still burned dimly along Baker Street as we descended the 17 steps and hailed a hansom. Our first test took us to the Central Telegraph Office near St. Paul's. The interior smelled of hot sealing wax and damp paper. The counter felt smooth and polished under my palm. Holmes laid the telegram slip before the chief clerk. This message: "Deal cancelled. Slade demands double. Was it handed in here?" The clerk adjusted his spectacles and consulted the ledger. "Yes, sir. Dispatched from this counter at 11:47, the morning before the murder. Signed E. Blackwood." Holmes's eyes narrowed. The signature. Compare it, if you will, to known specimens. After a brief search, the clerk produced a previous wire from Blackwood. The hand was unmistakably different, loopier, less controlled. "Forged," Holmes murmured. "A weak link snaps early." From the telegraph office we rattled across the city to Kensington once more. Miss Clara Vance answered our knock herself, her blue shawl draped over her shoulders. The small sitting room carried the familiar scent of carbolic soap. The fire in the grate gave off a modest warmth that barely touched the chill in the air. Holmes held up the thread we had recovered from the compartment. "This wool matches your shawl precisely," he said. "Yet you claimed never to have entered Sir Reginald's carriage." Miss Vance paled, fingers tightening on the fabric. I did lend the shawl to Lady Thorne at Euston. She returned it before we boarded. Perhaps a thread clung to her when she visited her husband." Holmes regarded her steadily. "Lady Thorne has already stated she remained in her own compartment throughout. The thread was caught on a splinter inside the door. Fresh, not transferred. This link buckles under pressure, Miss Vance." She sank into a chair, trembling. The rain tapped insistently against the window pane. Our next call was to Harley Street. Dr. Harlan Croft received us in his consulting room, where the sharp tang of carbolic mingled with a faint whiff of gunpowder from the shooting case in the corner. Holmes pointed to the residue we had scraped from the carriage stove. "Gunpowder, black powder, sporting grade. You admitted to target practice." Croft nodded calmly, "Twice weekly at the Albany range. I carry my own ammunition." Holmes produced a small envelope of the residue. "This matches your supply?" The doctor opened a drawer and compared samples under a lens. Identical, he conceded, but dozens of gentlemen shoot there. It proves nothing. Yet it places a possible means within reach, Holmes said. The link holds, for the moment. We pressed on to Euston Station to confront Conductor Jenkins. The platform lay quiet between trains. The air smelled of wet iron and lingering steam. Jenkins stood beside his lamp, uniform damp, the rough tweed darkened by rain. Holmes indicated the coal dust on the man's cuffs. "You stoked the compartment stove before departure?" "Aye, sir. Standard duty." Holmes showed him the oil smudge from the windowsill. "And this machine oil, your hands carry the same trace." Jenkins looked uncomfortable. "I oil the lamps and fittings daily. Nothing unusual." Holmes leaned closer. "A duplicate key to the first-class compartments. Does the company issue them?" Jenkins stiffened. "Only senior staff. I've no such thing." Holmes smiled thinly. "We shall see. This link bends, but does not yet break. Our final test of the day brought us back to Blackwood's offices in the city. The room felt stuffy, smelling strongly of ink and old tobacco. Blackwood rose as we entered, face flushed. Holmes laid the forged telegram upon the desk. "This was sent in your name, yet the hand is not yours." Blackwood stared at the paper. "I never sent it. Someone has imitated my writing." Holmes produced a sheet from Blackwood's own correspondence. "The forger was careless. See the inconsistent loops. But the content points directly to prior knowledge of the deal with Thorne." Blackwood sat heavily. "Thorne owed me, embezzled from our joint ventures years ago. I threatened exposure if he did not settle, but I swear I did not kill him." Holmes paced before the fire, which crackled softly in the grate. "The mud on your boots ties you to the Liverpool docks, where Sir Reginald must have boarded secretly. The forged telegram suggests you knew of his movements. Yet your presence in second class is vouched for by 2 witnesses. This chain of yours frays at several points." We returned to Baker Street as dusk gathered, the drizzle turning to a steady patter on the roof. The fire in our sitting room burned high, its warmth a welcome relief after the day's damp journeys. Holmes sat in his armchair, pipe in hand, drawing thoughtfully. 5 links tested today, Watson," he said. "The telegraph forgery weakens Blackwood's position but does not yet bind him. The shawl thread fractures Vance's denial. Croft's gunpowder holds his means but lacks motive. Jenkins's oil and coal dust remain circumstantial. Slade's absence from the train still appears solid, yet his demand for double echoes in the forged wire." I sipped the hot tea Mrs. Hudson had left, tasting its bitter strength. "And Lady Thorne's missing necklace? A red herring, perhaps, or the true motive veiled as robbery. Weak links have shattered, Watson. The true chain begins to emerge." Weak links shattered. The true chain emerges. Chapter 5. The chain tightens. As the days passed, the mystery no longer felt like a loose collection of threads. It had begun to pull taut, and with every fresh piece of evidence the chain drew tighter around its quarry. Holmes's restlessness had vanished entirely. He moved now with the focused energy of a hound that has caught the scent. On the 5th morning, the drizzle had finally ceased, though a thin gray mist still clung to the rooftops, and the air carried the familiar bite of coal smoke mixed with the damp rot of the river. We received an urgent note from Lestrade just after breakfast. Blackwood had been observed leaving his city offices in haste, carrying a small valise and heading toward the East End docks. Holmes read the message once, folded it neatly, and reached for his ulster. "The chain tightens, Watson. We must move at once." A hansom carried us swiftly through the awakening streets, wheels clattering over damp cobblestones, the horses' hooves striking sparks against the stone. The mist thickened as we neared the river. Foghorns moaned low and mournful from vessels anchored in the pool. The smell of Thames mud grew stronger, sour, fertile, mingled with tar and the sharp tang of hot engine oil from nearby wharves. We alighted near the warehouses of Shadwell Basin. Lestrade waited in the shadow of a brick arch, collar turned up against the chill. "He went in there," he whispered, nodding toward a long, low building stacked with crates marked for Liverpool and Glasgow. "Alone. No one has come out." Holmes's eyes gleamed in the dim light. Then we closed the net. We advanced quietly, boots soft on the wet planks. The warehouse door stood ajar. Inside, the air was thick with the odor of old tobacco, sacking, and machine grease. Crates loomed like silent sentinels, their rough wooden surfaces damp to the touch. A sudden scuffle broke the stillness, boots scraping, a crate toppling with a crash. Blackwood burst from between two stacks, valise clutched to his chest, face pale and wild. He saw us and turned to run deeper into the gloom. "Stop!" I shouted, drawing my revolver, its metal cold in my palm. Holmes was already moving, long strides eating the distance. Blackwood stumbled over a coil of rope, recovered, and darted toward a side door that opened onto a narrow wharf. We pursued him out into the open air. The mist rolled thick across the water. Gas lights on the opposite bank appeared as faint yellow smudges. Blackwood's footsteps pounded along the wooden boards, then faltered as he reached the edge, where a small launch bobbed against the pilings. He hesitated. Then Holmes closed the gap. Blackwood spun, drawing a short knife from his coat. The blade caught a gleam of light from a nearby lantern. "Stay back," he snarled. "Thorne cheated me, ruined me. He deserved it." Holmes halted a few paces away, hands raised but voice calm. "The knife you hold now. It bears the same gunpowder residue we found on the carriage stove. Croft's sporting powder, I presume. You borrowed it for your purpose." Blackwood's hand shook. Rain began again, light but steady, drumming on the warehouse roof behind us. I could hear the lap of water against the pilings, the distant clank of chains on moored vessels. "You boarded at the docks," Holmes continued, stepping forward slowly. "Not at Liverpool Station. The reddish clay on both your boots and Sir Reginald's proves it. You waited until the train slowed at a signal, slipped aboard through a goods door the conductor had left unsecured for coal. You entered the compartment, using the shawl thread to suggest another's presence as cover, struck once, stopped the watch to falsify the time, locked the door from inside with a thin tool passed beneath, then escaped the same way before the next stop." Blackwood's shoulders sagged. The knife wavered. "He owed me thousands. Years of embezzlement. I only wanted what was mine." Lestrade and two constables appeared from the mist. Blackwood dropped the knife. It clattered on the wet boards. The constables secured him without resistance. His coat, rough tweed, now soaked, gave off the mingled smells of tobacco and river damp as they led him away. Back at Baker Street that evening, the fire burned high, its warmth banishing the chill that had settled into my bones. Holmes sat in his armchair, legs stretched toward the hearth, pipe in hand. The smooth clay felt warm against his lips as he drew thoughtfully. The knife was the crucial link. "Watson," he said. The link. Its blade matches the single thrust wound exactly, and the residue upon the handle is identical to Croft's black powder, traced by the distinctive grain size under the microscope. The forge. Recall the speckled band affair. There, Dr. Roylott employed a speckled adder trained to descend a bell rope through a ventilator, leaving milk traces on a saucer as silent witness. The weapon itself was living, yet the chain was forged by small physical signs, the saucer, the rope fibers, the puncture marks, that bound past cruelty in India to a bedroom in Stoke Moran. So here the powder grains, borrowed under pretext of a shooting wager, link Blackwood irrevocably to the fatal blow, the chain. The motive, embezzlement covered by staged robbery, completes the circuit. The chain tightens, Watson. No escape remains. Did you feel it draw closed when the knife appeared? The bind. I poured brandy, sweet and warming, into 2 glasses. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the last of the day's rain pattered against the window. Holmes had been right. The links had multiplied, tested, and now pulled inexorably together. The chain tightens. No escape now. Chapter 6. Links to the past. With Elias Blackwood safely lodged in a cell at Scotland Yard, the fog of mystery began to clear, not through sudden revelation, but through the patient unearthing of the past. I have learned over the years that the present crime is seldom born in isolation. It carries the weight of earlier sins, and it was to those earlier links that Holmes now turned his attention. The 6th day dawned crisp and cold, the fog having retreated at last, to leave a pale sun struggling through the smoke haze over London. The air outside 221B carried the sharp bite of frost, mixed with the ever-present coal smoke from neighboring chimneys. Holmes stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching a hansom cab deposit a telegraph boy at our door. Mrs. Hudson brought the yellow envelope upstairs moments later, her footsteps quick on the 17 steps. Holmes tore it open, read the brief message, and nodded once. "From Liverpool," he said. "An old associate of Blackwood's, a warehouseman named Hargreaves, agrees to speak if we come at once. The past will illuminate the present, Watson. We caught the noon express from Euston. The carriage was half empty. The rhythmic clack of wheels on rails blended with the low hiss of steam and the occasional moan of the whistle as we passed through soot-blackened suburbs. The compartment smelled faintly of warm leather and coal dust. The seats felt smooth but worn beneath us. I tasted the bitter coffee from a station thermos, its heat welcome against the chill that seeped through the window frames. Liverpool greeted us with the familiar stench of dockside mud and tar, mingled with the sharp odor of hot metal from the foundries. Hargreaves met us in a small public house near the Clarence dock, its interior dim and heavy with pipe smoke and spilled ale. He was a wiry man in his 50s, hands calloused from years of handling crates, his rough serge jacket smelling of oil and tobacco. Blackwood and Thorne were partners 10 years back, Hargreaves said, a voice low. Import-export, iron, coal, machinery. Thorne handled the books. Blackwood trusted him. Big mistake. He took a pull from his pint, the glass cold against his fingers. Thorne siphoned funds. Slow at first, then bolder. Blackwood discovered it when a shipment payment never arrived. Thorne swore it was a mistake, covered the loss himself to keep the firm afloat. But the thefts continued. Blackwood confronted him. Thorne threatened exposure of Blackwood's own youthful indiscretions, smuggling, minor frauds in the Indies. Blackwood had no proof. He walked away, ruined, Holmes leaned forward, steepled fingers under his chin. And the ledgers? Hargreaves shrugged. Thorne kept them. Blackwood tried to recover copies years later. Failed. When Thorne announced the Liverpool merger last month, Blackwood saw his chance. I'd threatened to go public unless paid. Thorne laughed him off. Back in London that evening, we visited Scotland Yard. Lestrade met us in a small interview room where Blackwood sat, manacled, beneath a single gas jet. The air was cold and carried the faint smell of carbolic from the cells below. Blackwood looked haggard. His once imposing frame seemed diminished. You boarded secretly at the docks. Holmes began without preamble. The reddish clay on your boots and Sir Reginald's matches exactly. You waited for the slow signal near Edge Hill, slipped aboard through the goods van. Jenkins had left the door ajar for coal delivery. You carried the knife, borrowed from Croft under pretense of a shooting wager. The gunpowder residue confirms it. You entered the compartment, using Miss Vance's shawl, perhaps borrowed earlier, to leave a misleading thread. One thrust, clean and silent. You stopped the watch at 3:17 by dipping it briefly in water from your flask, replaced it, locked the door from inside with a thin blade passed under the sill, then retreated the same way before the next halt. Blackwood stared at the table, voice hoarse. He owed me everything. I only wanted justice. Holmes drew a small packet from his ulster, photostat copies of ledgers obtained that afternoon from a former clerk. These entries show transfers to accounts controlled by Thorne. Your money siphoned over 7 years. The motive is clear. The robbery was staged, wallet taken, necklace removed from the house earlier, and planted elsewhere to suggest theft. We returned to Baker Street as night fell. The fire burned bright, its warmth driving back the frost that clung to the window panes. Holmes settled into his chair, pipe in hand, the smooth clay warm against his lips as he drew thoughtfully. "Recall the case of the stockbroker's clerk, Watson," he said. Hall Pycroft was lured from his post by a false advertisement so that his identity could be assumed for a city fraud. The chain was forged by small things, the advertisement in the same paper, the identical handwriting on 2 letters, the sudden wealth of the supposed Arthur Pinner. Past deception mirrored present. Observation linked them. So here, Blackwood's old frauds in the Indies gave Thorne leverage. Thorne's embezzlement gave Blackwood motive. The dock's mud, the forged telegram, the borrowed knife, all threads from the past woven into murder. Past and present are one unbroken chain. I poured brandy, sweet and fiery, into our glasses. The fire crackled softly. Outside, a late hansom clattered past, wheels hissing on damp cobbles. Holmes's eyes gleamed in the firelight. The story of Blackwood's life, once hidden, now lay exposed link by link, past and present, one unbroken chain. Chapter 7. The complete chain. The hour had come to draw the final links together and bind them irrevocably. With Elias Blackwood in custody and the evidence assembled, Holmes proposed that we gather the principal persons at 221B Baker Street that same evening. The fog had returned in force, pressing thick against the windows and carrying the acrid bite of coal smoke from the street below. Gas lamps outside cast a dull yellow glow through the haze. Inside, the coal fire roared high, its warmth and crackle a stark contrast to the chill that clung to our visitors as they arrived one by one. Mrs. Hudson had arranged extra chairs in a semicircle before the hearth. The room smelled of strong tobacco from Holmes's pipe. mingled with the faint lavender scent Lady Thorne brought with her, and the sharper carbolic trace that still clung to Dr. Croft's coat. The leather seats felt smooth and warm from the fire. The 17 steps had echoed with each arrival, Lady Thorne first, then Miss Vance, Dr. Croft, Victor Slade, and finally Inspector Lestrade escorting the manacled Blackwood, whose rough tweed coat was damp and gave off the lingering odor of river mud and tobacco. Holmes stood before the mantel, hands clasped behind his back, eyes gleaming with that peculiar light. He waited until all were seated, the only sound the steady tick of the mantel clock and the soft hiss of gas in the lamps. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice calm and precise, "tonight the chain is complete. I shall lay it before you link by link, so that no doubt remains." He turned first to the physical evidence, the reddish clay and coal dust upon Sir Reginald's boots and upon Mr. Blackwood's, identical composition, traceable only to the Liverpool dockside foundries. Physical link 1. This proves Sir Reginald did not board at the main station, but joined the train secretly at a freight siding near the docks. Blackwood waited there. The mud remembers every step. Next, he indicated a small envelope on the table. The knife found in Blackwood's possession when he was apprehended. Physical link 2. Its blade matches the single thrust wound exactly. Microscopic examination shows gunpowder residue of sporting grade, identical in grain size and composition to samples from Dr. Croft's shooting kit, borrowed under pretext of a wager. The weapon is accounted for. He moved to the timeline. The pocket watch stopped at 3:17. Timeline, link 1. Internal condensation proves it was deliberately immersed in water. Blackwood's traveling flask contained traces of the same. Death occurred shortly after the train slowed near Edgehill. The watch was falsified to suggest an earlier hour and confuse the inquest. Timeline, link 2, he continued, producing the conductor's log. The goods van door left ajar for coal delivery, standard practice, yet unsecured long enough for Blackwood to slip aboard. He retreated the same way before Crewe. Holmes turned to the witnesses. The blue wool thread caught on the compartment door. Witness link 1, from Miss Vance's shawl, lent briefly to Lady Thorne at Euston, and returned. Blackwood used it deliberately to suggest another's presence, knowing suspicion would fall elsewhere. Miss Vance is exonerated. Her only fault was kindness. Witness link 2, he said, nodding to Lestrade. Conductor Jenkins's testimony of the locked door. Yet the fresh scratch on the lock plate shows manipulation from inside with a thin tool, passed under the door after the act, then retrieved. No duplicate key needed. He addressed motive next. The forged telegram, deal cancelled. Slade demands double, sent in Blackwood's name but not by his hand. Motive, link 1. It was planted to implicate Slade and divert attention. The true motive lies deeper. Ledgers from Thorne's office, a photo stated yesterday, show systematic embezzlement over 7 years. Funds siphoned from joint ventures into accounts controlled by Sir Reginald. Blackwood discovered it too late. Thorne used knowledge of Blackwood's earlier smuggling in the Indies to silence him. When the Liverpool merger offered a final settlement, Blackwood demanded payment. Refused, he acted. Finally, Holmes lifted the small packet of documents. The last connecting link. The necklace reported missing from Lady Thorne's house. Final link. It was never stolen for robbery. Blackwood took it 2 days earlier during a business call, planted it in his valise to stage a theft, and mask the true purpose. The wallet was taken post-mortem for the same reason. Every element of the supposed robbery was fabricated. Blackwood sat motionless, head bowed. The fire crackled. A coal shifted with a soft pop. Lady Thorne dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. Miss Vance clasped her hands tightly. Croft adjusted his spectacles in astonishment. Slade exhaled slowly, relief evident. Holmes stepped forward. You struck once, silently, then arranged every detail to point away from yourself. But the ground, the metal, the fiber, the ink, the powder, each bore witness. When you eliminate the impossible, locked door without inside escape, robbery without greed, timeline without manipulation, whatever remains, however improbable, is the truth. Elias Blackwood, you murdered Sir Reginald Thorne. Blackwood raised his head at last. His voice was low, almost a whisper. He took everything. I only wanted what was mine. He looked at Holmes. You've chained me tighter than these irons ever could. Lestrade rose. Elias Blackwood, I arrest you for the murder of Sir Reginald Thorne. The constables stepped forward. Blackwood offered no resistance as they led him down the 17 steps. The door closed behind them with a final thud. Silence fell in the room. The fire snapped. Outside, a hansom cab clattered past through the fog. Holmes turned to the others. The innocent are cleared. The guilty is bound. The case is closed. Every link accounted for. The chain complete. Chapter 8. Justice in Chains. The fog that had shrouded London for so many days seemed, on the morning following the gathering at Baker Street, to have lifted at last. A pale sun filtered through the thinning haze, casting long shadows across the wet cobblestones of Whitehall. The air carried the clean, sharp scent of recent rain mingled with the ever-present coal smoke from distant chimneys and the faint, metallic tang of the river. I walked beside Holmes toward Scotland Yard, our boots ringing on the pavement, while behind us a Black Maria rumbled slowly, its iron wheels grinding over the stones. Inside the yard, the atmosphere was brisk and businesslike. Gas lamps hissed overhead. The corridors smelled of carbolic soap, old paper, and the faint gunpowder residue that always lingered near the firearms room. Inspector Lestrade met us at the entrance to the charge room, his face flushed with satisfaction. "All in order, gentlemen," he said. "The warrant is signed. We'll take him down to the cell shortly." Elias Blackwood was brought forward in manacles, flanked by 2 sturdy constables. His rough tweed coat, still bearing faint traces of dockside mud and tobacco, hung loosely on his frame. The days in custody had hollowed his cheeks. He walked with head bowed, footsteps heavy on the stone floor. When he saw Holmes, he stopped short. "You," he said, voice rough but steady. "You forged the chain that binds me. Every link, mud, knife, telegram, watch, I see them now. Clear as day. I thought myself clever, but you saw through every deception." Holmes regarded him without triumph, only that calm, piercing gaze. "You underestimated observation, Mr. Blackwood. The ground, the metal, the fiber, they do not lie. You arranged the scene with care, yet left traces no artifice could erase." Blackwood gave a short, bitter laugh. "Thorne took my future. Years of honest work, stolen in secret columns of figures. I wanted only restitution. One thrust, and it was done. The rest, the locked door, the stopped watch, the planted clues, was to buy time. I almost succeeded." "Almost," Holmes echoed, "but the chain was always there waiting to be completed." Lestrade stepped forward with the formal charge sheet. Elias Blackwood, you are charged with the wilful murder of Sir Reginald Thorne on the Liverpool Express by stabbing with a knife. You will be taken before the magistrate this afternoon and committed for trial at the Old Bailey." Blackwood lifted his head, eyes meeting mine for a moment. "Tell Lady Thorne. I bear her no malice. It was him alone." Then he allowed the constables to lead him away. The heavy door of the cell corridor clanged shut behind him, the sound echoing down the passage like the closing of a final chapter. We followed Lestrade to his office, a small room warmed by a coal fire that crackled in the grate. The inspector poured 3 measures of brandy from a decanter on the shelf, sweet and strong, its warmth spreading through us after the chill of the corridors. He raised his glass. "To justice," he said, "and to you, Holmes, without whom we'd still be chasing shadows and calling it robbery." Holmes inclined his head, but did not drink at once. "There remain loose ends to tie," he said. "The ruby necklace, found this morning in Blackwood's lodgings, concealed in the lining of his valise. It was never intended for sale. He kept it as proof of the stage theft. The wallet, contents intact, save for a few notes, was discovered beneath the seat in the goods van, where he discarded it after the murder." Lestrade nodded. "We've recovered both. Lady Thorne will have her heirloom returned by evening. The insurance claim she lodged will be withdrawn." "And the other parties?" I asked, feeling the smooth leather of the chair beneath my palms. "Miss Vance is cleared beyond question," Holmes replied. "Her shawl thread was used against her unwittingly. She has already accepted a new post in Kensington. Dr. Croft's powder was borrowed innocently. He will face no charge. Victor Slade's name was dragged in by the forged telegram, but his alibi holds firm. His business with Thorne was rivalry, not murder. Conductor Jenkins remains employed. The unsecured door was negligence, not complicity." Lestrade set his glass down with a soft clink. "The Yard owes you a debt, Holmes. This case might have gone down as unsolved robbery but for your chain of logic. Every link tested, every weak one broken, the strong ones binding the truth." Holmes finally sipped the brandy, its heat rising in his throat. "Justice is served not by spectacle, but by patient observation. The criminal is bound. The innocent walk free. That is enough." We left the Yard as the afternoon sun broke fully through the mist. Hansom cabs clattered past. Big Ben tolled the hour with deep, resonant strokes that vibrated through the damp air. Holmes walked in silence for some distance, then spoke quietly. "The chain is no longer ours to carry, Watson. It has done its work. Blackwood will face judge and jury. The evidence is overwhelming. The courtroom will hear the links recited one by one: mud, knife, telegram, watch, ledgers, and find them unbreakable." I nodded, tasting the lingering sweetness of brandy on my tongue. The streets of London felt lighter somehow, the fog's oppression gone, though the familiar smells of coal smoke, horse dung, and river mud remained as constant as ever. That evening, back at 221B, the fire burned low and steady. Mrs. Hudson brought up a simple supper, hot soup, whose steam carried the scent of leeks and beef, bread still warm from the oven. We ate quietly, the events of the day settling into place. "The criminal bound," Holmes said at last, leaning back in his chair, pipe in hand. "Justice served." The criminal bound. Justice served. Chapter 9. Links restored. The wheels of justice, once set in motion, turn with deliberate slowness in our English courts, yet they turn surely. In the weeks that followed Blackwood's committal, The fogs of autumn gave way to the sharper bite of early winter. London's streets glittered with frost under gas lamps at dusk. The air carried the clean, crisp smell of coal smoke, sharpened by cold, mingled with the faint scent of roasted chestnuts from street vendors and the ever-present damp of the Thames. I walked often to the Old Bailey during those days, the cold cobblestones ringing under my boots, while inside the great hall the breath of the assembled crowd rose in faint clouds. The trial opened on a gray Monday morning. The courtroom smelled of polished oak, old paper, and the faint metallic tang of ink from the reporters' benches. Gas lights hissed overhead. The jury sat attentive in their box, faces serious beneath their wigs and gowns. Blackwood stood in the dock, manacled hands resting on the rail. His once broad shoulders stooped. He wore a plain gray suit provided by the prison. The rough wool looked stiff and unfamiliar on him. The Crown Prosecutor, a tall man with a voice like gravel, laid out the case methodically. He called first the medical examiner, who described the single clean thrust through the heart. Precise, practiced, no sign of struggle. Then Inspector Lestrade took the stand, recounting the discovery at Euston. Locked compartment, missing wallet, absent necklace. He produced the pocket watch, its hands still frozen at 3:17, and explained the condensation that proved deliberate immersion. Holmes was summoned next. He entered the box with his usual calm stride, placed his gloves neatly on the rail, and answered each question in measured tones. He began with the mud. The reddish clay and coal dust upon both the victim's and the prisoner's boots, he said, originates solely from the freight sidings near Liverpool's Edge Hill foundries. Sir Reginald could not have acquired it at the main station. Therefore, he boarded secretly, precisely where Blackwood waited. He moved to the knife, produced in a sealed glass case. This blade matches the wound dimensions exactly. The gunpowder residue upon the handle, sporting grade, distinctive grain, matches samples from Dr. Harlan Croft's kit, borrowed by the prisoner under false pretense. Question by question, Holmes recited the chain. The forged telegram implicating Slade, the blue wool thread from Miss Vance's shawl used to mislead, the thin scratch on the lock plate showing internal manipulation, with a tool passed beneath the door, the ledgers proving years of embezzlement by Sir Reginald from joint funds. Each link was presented with diagrams, photostats, and physical exhibits. The jury leaned forward, following the logic as inexorably as iron drawn to a magnet. Blackwood's counsel, a young barrister with earnest eyes, attempted to cast doubt. Circumstantial evidence, my lord. Many men wear similar boots. Many borrow powder for sport. But Holmes's cross-examination was gentle, yet devastating. Many men, perhaps, but few share the exact motive, opportunity, and means, all corroborated by traces no one else could leave. The jury retired at 3:30. We waited in the corridor outside where the cold stone floor chilled our feet, and the distant chime of Big Ben marked the passing hours. Holmes paced slowly, hands clasped behind his back, while I sipped bitter tea from a station flask, its heat a small comfort. At 5:20, the jury returned. The foreman rose, a voice steady. We find the prisoner, Elias Blackwood, guilty of murder. A low murmur ran through the court. Blackwood stood motionless as the black cap was placed upon the judge's head. The sentence was pronounced, death by hanging. The words fell like stones into still water. Afterward, in the anteroom, Lady Thorne approached us. Her mourning veil was lifted. Her eyes were red but composed. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said quietly, "you have restored my husband's memory from stain of mere robbery. The truth is known. I thank you." Miss Vance, too, sent a note the following day, delivered by hand to Baker Street. She had taken up her new post as governess in a quiet Kensington household. The shadow of suspicion had lifted entirely. "Your chain freed me," she wrote, "when I feared it would bind me." Dr. Croft resumed his practice without blemish. Victor Slade's commercial affairs flourished once the forged telegram was exposed as Blackwood's diversion. Conductor Jenkins retained his position, though under stricter supervision. The unsecured door became a cautionary tale in railway training. London moved on. The newspapers carried headlines for a day or two. Express murderer convicted, Holmes's chain of evidence unbreakable. Then turned to other matters. Strikes in the docks, a royal visit, the first snow dusting the rooftops. The fog returned, softer now, wrapping the city in its familiar gray embrace. Hansom cabs clattered through the streets. Big Ben told the hours with its deep, reassuring voice. The smells of coal smoke, roasted chestnuts, and river mud remained as constant as the Thames itself. At Baker Street, the fire burned steadily each evening. Holmes returned to his violin, the notes of sarasate floating through the warm room. Mrs. Hudson brought up supper, hot soup fragrant with herbs, bread still warm, and life resumed its quiet rhythm. The innocent had been cleared. Futures once clouded by suspicion now stretched clear ahead. Lady Thorne would manage the estate with dignity. Miss Vance would shape young minds without fear. The others would carry on their lives unshadowed. Order, disturbed for a season, had been restored. One evening, as snow began to fall softly outside the window, Holmes set his pipe aside and looked across at me. "The chain served its purpose, Watson. It bound the guilty, freed the blameless, and returned equilibrium to the streets. London endures." I nodded, tasting the sweet warmth of brandy on my lips. The city beyond the panes glittered white under gaslight. The frost traced delicate patterns on the glass. The mystery had ended. The links had done their work. Order restored to London's streets. Chapter 10. By the Fire at Baker Street. Weeks had passed since the black cap was placed upon the judge's head at the Old Bailey. London had settled back into its familiar rhythm. The fog returned in gentle veils. Gas lamps flickered along the streets at dusk. Hansom cabs clattered over frosted cobblestones, and the deep voice of Big Ben marked the hours with unchanging certainty. At 221 B. Baker Street, the coal fire burned low and steady, its warm orange glow pushing back the winter chill that pressed against the window panes. The room smelled of shag tobacco, polished leather, and the faint, a comforting aroma of Mrs. Hudson's mutton broth simmering downstairs. Holmes sat in his usual armchair, legs stretched toward the hearth, Stradivarius violin resting across his knees. He drew the bow slowly across the strings, coaxing out a soft, melancholy air. Something of Mendelssohn, I thought, though he never named it. I occupied the opposite chair, a newspaper spread across my lap, though I had long ceased reading. The headlines had already moved on. Railway strikes, colonial dispatches, a new play at the Lyceum. The Liverpool Express murder was yesterday's sensation. Mrs. Hudson ascended the 17 steps with a tray, 2 glasses of hot toddy, fragrant with lemon and whiskey, and a plate of shortbread still warm from the oven. She set it down with a quiet clink of china. "You've both earned a quiet evening, gentlemen," she said, her voice kind but brisk, No more telegrams tonight, I hope." Holmes set the violin aside and accepted a glass, the steam rising in lazy curls. "No more telegrams, Mrs. Hudson. The chain is forged, tested, and laid aside." When she had gone, we sat in companionable silence for a time, the fire crackling softly, the toddy warming our throats with its sweet, fiery bite. At length, Holmes spoke, his voice low and reflective. "The case is summarized in the evening editions, Watson, neatly packaged for the public. Industrialist murdered on express train. Rival's desperate act exposed by consulting detective. They mention the locked compartment, the stopped watch, the forged telegram. They do not mention the chain." He leaned forward, steepled his fingers beneath his chin. "Yet that is the true method, the one constant in every affair we have shared. Observation yields the link, logic forges the connection, repetition of pattern reveals the past, and when every impossible explanation is eliminated, the truth remains, bound and unbreakable." I nodded, tasting the lingering sweetness of the toddy on my tongue. "You have always said as much." But in this instance, the chain seemed particularly visible. Mud to docks, knife to powder, telegram to motive. Each link tested until only the strong ones held. "Precisely." Holmes reached for his pipe, filling it from the Persian slipper with slow, deliberate movements. The rich tobacco aroma blended with the wood smoke. "Consider the Hound of the Baskervilles, Watson, perhaps the most elaborate deception we ever encountered. A spectral hound, phosphorus-painted, he trained to terrify. The legend of the family curse seemed complete. Every witness swore to the beast. Yet one small saucer of cream, one boot stolen and returned, one fiber of tweed caught on a thorn, all spoke of artifice. The ground beneath Stapleton's boot bore the same marsh peat as the prints near Baskerville Hall. The boot itself carried traces of the phosphorus that glowed in the dark. Link by link, we dismantled the myth. The hound was no demon, but a starved animal. The curse was no ancient doom, but a scheme for inheritance. Observation defeated centuries of superstition because the earth, the cloth, the chemical residue could not lie. So here, the mud could not pretend to be London clay. The watch could not feign an accidental stop. The powder grains could not disguise their origin. Deception fractures under scrutiny. Truth endures because it is physical. He drew upon the pipe, eyes half closed, the smoke curling toward the ceiling. That is the science of deduction, Watson, not intuition, not genius, but relentless accumulation of data. When you have eliminated the impossible, locked door without escape, robbery without greed, timeline without manipulation, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Blackwood overlooked that the smallest trace, the clay fleck, the thread, the condensation, would speak louder than any alibi. I set my glass down, feeling the warmth of the fire on my face. "And yet you were idle when the telegram arrived. Boredom is your greatest enemy." Holmes smiled faintly. "And challenge my greatest friend. The game continues because the world continues to deceive itself. Men believe they can hide their footsteps. They forget the ground remembers. They think time can be stopped without leaving a mark. They forget glass betrays water. They imagine motive can be masked as chance. They forget ledgers endure." He rose and paced slowly before the hearth, shadows dancing across the walls. "We are not detectives in the ordinary sense, Watson. We are restorers of order. A link breaks the chain of lies. The forged chain binds the liar. When it is complete, equilibrium returns. Lady Thorne mourns with truth instead of suspicion. Miss Vance teaches without fear. London's streets turn again without the shadow of unsolved murder. He stopped, looking out at the snow that had begun to fall, soft, silent flakes drifting past the gaslit panes, until the next puzzle arrives, another telegram, another knock at Mrs. Hudson's door, the chain rests, but it is always ready to be reforged. I joined him at the window. The city lay quiet under its white veil. A lone, handsome cab passed below, wheels muffled by snow. The fire crackled behind us. The toddy glasses gleamed on the table. "Observe keenly, dear reader," Holmes said softly, almost to the night itself. "Forge your links with care. Eliminate the impossible. In the end, truth will bind what deception sought to free. The game continues. Until the next chain forges, dear listener. The game continues."